Greetings, brothers and sisters. This is Yashib in Israel. Back at you one more again. Yes, sir. Bob. I am here to spread some information and talk about uh, the Mozabites. We're going to talk a little bit about Mozabite history. We're going to talk about a little bit about genetics. I'm going to teach you some words. So when you look into genetic studies and genetic research, that you know how to read these words. A lot of people is not going to tell you these things. They use knowledge to weaponize knowledge and to grandstand over others. We're not doing that over here on the Yashib in Israel Israelite Thought YouTube channel. We're not doing that. We're teaching our brothers and sisters, and we're spreading the truth through teaching and education, just like any other college or university. There's others in the African American community that likes to use their knowledge as a weapon and to weaponize it. They use religion and they use everything that they know as a weapon, and they use it as a tool to grandstand over others. Well, I am here to help and to share. So today we're going to look into what does et al means and what is it used for. Et al is an abbreviation for the Latin phrase et ali or et la, which means and others. It's commonly used in academic and research context to cite multiple authors. In references or citations, et al. Is used to shorten lists of authors, typically when there are three or more authors. For example, Smith et al. 2000 implies Smith is the lead author and there are other co-authors. Number two, save space. Et al. Helps to condense long lists of authors, making citations more concise and reliable. You'll often see et al. Used in research papers, academic citations. Example, APA, MLA, Chicago styles, in bibliographies and in references. Today we will be reading from the Jews of the Sahara. Yes, we'll be talking about the Jews of the Sahara. And this article is written by Ronald L. Nagel, Irvin D. Karpis, Professor of Medicine, Department of Medicine and Hematology. That's Albert Einstein College of Medicine, the Bronx, New York, 10461. So we can see here that this brother knows about microbiology and one who is more than qualified to talk about genetics. He is a researcher, okay, and he does research in the field of genes and genetics and stuff like that. So we're going to read, this is his research. We're going to read his research, right? So let's go. Many years ago, my French colleague and collaborator, Dominique Lebris, had arranged a scientific trip to Algeria to study hemoglobinopathies in Algeria. Mears and others, 1981. Pagniers and others, 1984. After several days of intense research, Clarice Bedford, the younger of the hosts, proposed that we take a weekend off and go to Gardia. To notice, to entice us, he said, it will be a fun trip. Let me blow this up some. To entice us, he said, it will be a fun trip to the Sahara, and you cannot imagine how beautiful the place is. Dominique and I rapidly signed up for this great opportunity. Finally, I would see the Sahara Desert, the magical and mysterious Sahara Desert. During the trip, Sharif began to share with us some tidbits about our destination. We're going to the Pentapolis of Gardea, the 5 cities of the Sahara, he mentioned. These were walled villages that were holy towns, and as holy towns, they did not admit infidels in their midst after sunset. Hence stayed in a hotel outside the walls and visited the town during the day. It was getting late in the evening, so we stopped in Angelfa, halfway to Gardea, to spend the night. The next morning, we got up early to begin the second leg of our trip, and Sharif began talking again about Gardea. To my amazement, he said, when the Jews lived in Gardea, I remember turning suddenly and saying, "What? When? What are you talking about?" He replied, "I don't know much about it, I know every, but I know they lived there and not long ago." My mind began to spin with a plethora of thoughts. Jews in the Sahara? Did they leave or were they chased out? Were everybody killed? If they left voluntarily, where are they now? All of a sudden, this trip had turned upside down, and I felt an anxious need to answer these questions. The streets of Gardea. At the end of the day, when the sun was setting, we arrived at the door of Gardea. I ran to the entrance of the hotel and climbed to the terrace. I could not believe the striking view below. As described by Cherif, it was indeed a pentapolis with 5 villages perched atop high pinnacles, dominating the Mozab Valley. White houses crowned with sides of hills and ascending spirals of narrow concentric circles completed the landscape. At the top, majestically, was a lone minaret of strange and inviting architecture. It was crowded to the point that from this angle you could not see the narrow streets. This was a reasonable design used for protection from the merciless blazing sun, only seen previously in southern Spain. The surrounding desert, as far as the eye could see, was a daunting and disquieting sight. I decided not to wait for my co-travelers who were tired from the trip. I hurried to cross the gates of the city with the proper elan that seemed to be required. I had a plan. The first rather old person that I encountered, I'd ask, as a matter of fact, in a broken French, Monsieur où est la synagogue? S'il vous plaît. Where is the synagogue, please? Without hesitation, he said, Rue. This is Rue Jerusalem number 5. excuse me, A is New Jerusalem number 5. That's B, which is the uh, cupola of the synagogue with the minaret on the top of the hill in the background. And then you have C here, which is the portion of the interior of the roof synagogue. So without hesitation, he answered, Rue. Rue Jerusalem sing. Jerusalem Street number 5. And pointing the way. My heart was beating much too fast. I then asked, Yaatelis de Jews Isu, are Jews living here? He answered, a couple. I ran up the street and turned on Jerusalem Street. And about half a block down on the right was a semi-destroyed building with a Mogan David six-pointed star made of iron on the top of old wooden door figure number 1. I knew then that I had to learn considerably more about these Jews of the Sahara. I left Jerusalem Street and asked for directions to the Zouk, which is the Central Market. Dominique had told me that it was a fascinating place. As I was entering the ample Zouk, an incredible sight caught my attention. Figure number 2. In the middle of this large square, they were 7 or maybe 10 very tall men moving slowly, wrapped in indigo blue tunics, blue turbans, and large sheaths, carved knives hanging from their belts. The blue of their garb came from vegetable dyes for many centuries, until the middle of the 19th century, when an enterprising German salesman from the powerful Teutonic chemical industry gave them a sample of their bottled blue indigo dye. It turned out to be much more practical, but with one exception. They chose to ignore it stained their skin. Everybody opened a path for them with obvious awe. The contrast to the Mozabites, the inhabitants of Mozab of Berber origin, who are rather short in height, was striking, and their demeanor was frankly royal. I had read about these people, and I had seen a related population elsewhere. They were the Tuareg, Berber-speaking people who ran the camel caravans that crisscrossed the Sahara Desert for centuries. They also lived in the Ahagar Mountains, not far from the Dogon country of Mali, where I had previously encountered them as the Kelkumer Tuareg, Junian and others, 1997. Marin Sandrell and others, 1977. Interestingly, both of these Berber-speaking groups and the Mozabites exhibited a significant frequency of the abnormal hemoglobin D. Aulad Rabab, Junin and others, 1997. Maureen Sandrell and others, 1977. Magraub and others, 1977. This is the research that they did. This hemoglobin might protect the population from dying of malaria. Rott and others, 1991. But further work needs to be done in this area. Anyone wishing to buy something in the Zouk must go early and acquire what they need in the public auction. Recently, I had seen the same system still practiced by the Jewish population on the island of Jarba in Tunisia, where fish is auctioned in the market hall, and the regulator sits in a high chair deciding the daily price of each type of fish. After milling around in the zouk for a couple of hours, where I saw pantomime, the firing of musket, the rapid exchange of mountains of bills, children running around feverishly, and strictly veiled women with extraordinary expressive eyes, I decided to get serious. I visited a few of the rug stores and I bought two rugs. One, a nuptial rug that a bride receives, and the second, a small living room rug. The price paid was looking like a merchant des trappes, as the French would say, hauling the rugs on my shoulders for the rest of the trip. The next stop was the minaret that was striking with its gleaming whitewash exterior. Lack of sharp edges, round combers, and a few odd places. Little square windows used for protection from the intense sunlight. The projection, a window, the projection, a pencil of light into the interior dramatically enhanced the experience. These features reminded us of Le Corbusier, the famous Swiss-French architect, and particularly his rendition of the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Haute, also called Ranchamp. I was rapidly informed by locals that Le Corbusier had indeed visited Gardea, but to my knowledge never publicly recognized the influence. The same architectural details are exhibited in the tombs of the local cemetery in Figure 3. Origins of Gardea. But how did Gardea come to be? Gardea was founded in the 11th century by the puritanical Islamic Ahmadiyya sect, who converted to Islam in the 7th century CE, Figure 4. The Abadi were a North African offshoot of the Karaji sect, who broke from Orthodox Islam shortly after the death of the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century CE. As did the Berber tribes, they became followers of Ibn Abd and later of Ibn Rustum, the Karaji governor of Kairouan, Tunisia's holy city, and according to some, the fourth holiest place of Islam. In the 8th century CE, a Rostami state was formed in the northern mountains, in the oasis of Tirat, and was destroyed in 909 by the Fatimids. The Abad Araji retreated to the south and finally ended up in the Mazab, which became the land of the Mozabites. They conquered the desert by creating oases with date palm trees. By, excuse me, They conquered the desert by creating oases with date palm groves watered by 6 dams that would build across Awad River Mazab. Appropriately colored blue, the water was the color that repelled evil, by thousands of painfully dug wells. Of course, old Mozab runs with water only every 4 years or so. Therefore, constructing the dams critical. The Mozab grew vegetables, fruit, legumes, and cereals in the oasis and protect the crops from the blazing sun by large palm trees. Since the trip took place in the mid 1980s, I forgot I came to know the name of Lloyd Cabot Briggs, a Harvard professor and member of the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology in Cambridge, Massachusetts. One may return to the States. I searched for his work and found a monograph written with the associate, Miss Narima Nami Guade, a registered nurse and a Mozabite, entitled No More Forever, a Saharan Jewish Town. A tragic, but in many ways a heart-telling tale and a reminder of the dark and brilliant side of humanity. Briggs, 1964. How and where did the Mozabites and the Jews establish their alliance of cohabitation? Although the Mozabites spoke a Berger language, their long-term origin is a bit of a mystery. Bott and others, year 2000. So the Mozabites, their origin is a bit of a mystery. So we can read that in the Bott and others' research of the year 2000. And he have analyzed a large set of autosomal short tandem repeat, which is STR. So when you see the word, the abbreviation STR inside of these researches, it stands for short tandem repeat. So let's read that back from the beginning. How and where did these Mozabites and Jews establish their alliance cohabitation? Although the Moabites speak a Berber language, their long-term origin is a bit a mystery. Bott and others 2000 have analyzed a large set of autosomal short tandem repeat loci in several Arabic and Berber-speaking groups from northwest Africa. Example, the Moroccan Arabs, the northern, central, and southern Moroccan Berbers, the Sahrawis, and the Mozabites. When the northwest African population was grouped across to cultural and linguistic differences, the partition was not associated with genetic differences, but it is likely an Arabization of the Berbers was mainly a cultural process. So he's saying here that basically that the genetic process was different from others, and that the Arabization of these Berbers were mostly a cultural process, meaning they adopted the cultural more so than they did of them mating, right? Thus, it is likely that the Arabization of the Berbers were mainly a cultural process. Southern and northern central Berbers and Mozabites are clearly genetically distinct. So you look at the southern and northern Berbers and the Mozabites, they look different. Where the southern Mozabites are dark-skinned people, and the Berbers and the northern Berbers are light-skinned people. So what we have here, the genetics and the origin of the Mozabites. It has been proposed that the inhabitants of the Mozab forebears were descendants of the Semitic Phoenicians. Carthaginians who survived the Roman destruction of Carthage in 146 AD. Some have pointed to the triangular door decoration, the sign of the fish that are found amongst Arabs and Berbers as well, and the sign of the sun and the stars as indications of Carthaginian influence, as in the custom of laying sacrificial offerings on graves. This is the Muller study of 1988. Genetic analysis based on the short tandem repeats demonstrates that the major outlier within Northwest Africa are the Mozabites. I repeat, genetic analysis based on short tandem repeats demonstrates that the major outlier within Northwest Africa are the Mozabites. Their genetic drift possible in a small endogmatic population in which genes can be lost by chance over time, or founders, effects that the Phoenicians involved in the founding could have been by chance an odd aggregate of Phoenician genes, may have altered haplogroup frequencies. In any case, they are a genetically unique human group. Phylogenetic analysis of mitochondrial DNA performed in Western Mediterranean populations by Plaza and others, 2003, demonstrated that the Mozabites are very distinct from Berbers, but closer to Algerians and Mauritanians. Again, the same reasons discussed above might apply here regarding the maternal inheritance pathway. The Englishmen R.V.C. Bodley and friends of T.E. Lawrence became familiar with the land of the Mozabites. This is in the Muller study in 1988. In Wind of the Sahara, he wrote that the Berber is a sedentary farmer and the Mozabite is a city dweller. The latter never leaves the city unless he is so poor that he cannot afford to hire an Arab or a Negro to work for him. A Mozabite is usually a wealthy merchant, while the Berber considers himself fortunate if he has enough to eat. During the Great Famine of 1921, when Berbers and Arabs throughout North Africa were dying of malnutrition, and the Jews and French were also suffering, the Mozabites had all they needed. Paying in gold, they imported grain from the United States. The origin of the Mozabite Jews is not clear, but Briggs, in his 1964 study, citing Cherokees les Jaoufs d'Afrique du Nord, contend that they settled in Tamantit after the Roman Emperor Trajan ordered the extermination of the Jews in Syrincia in 118 Common Era. Located northeast of the present-day Libya and directly to the west of Egypt. Syrincia was colonized by Durian Greeks in the 7th century BCE, and fell to Alexander the Great in 331 BCE. The country subsequently came under the rule of Ptolemy I, who is said to have settled the Jews in the region. So Ptolemy I is the one who is responsible for settling the Jews in the Carthaginian region. The origin and the travel of the Jews of the Mozab. Jews of Cyrenian origin, Eastern Berbers, might have mixed with Sephardi Jews, which are your Jews of color, your black Jews. Nonetheless, the Jews of Sephard, Spain, your Sephardi Jews are your Jews of Spain, the Jews of color, the black Jews of Spain. Jews of Cyrenian origin, Eastern Berbers, might have mixed with Sephardic Jews. Nonetheless, the Jews of Sephard, which is Spain, in turn, have an origin that is not entirely clear. There is persistent dispute as to when the Jews arrived in Sephard, which is Spain. Some say that it was when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem in 586 CE, destroyed the temple. Destroyed the temple. The destruction of the first temple, and exiled the Jewish people, some of which went to Spain, while others went to Babylon. Still others established Jewish communities all around the Mediterranean, including Egypt, where they constructed a temple in Elephantine, and on the northern African coast, especially in Carthage, and on the island of Jarba. Others contended that Jews arrived to Spain or Sepharad around 70 CE, when Roman legions under Titus conquered the city and destroyed the temple of Jerusalem for the second time, which is your second temple, and forced the Jews into the second diaspora, which is this here, figure 5. The Sephardic sources in Spain are equally divided. The Jews of Granada contend that after the destruction of the first temple, they came to Al-Andalus, present-day Al-Andalusia, where they founded Granada and later extended to Cordova and Toledo. The name of Toledo could have come from either of the Hebrew words Teledot or Titul. The Jews of Marida claim that the move to Al-Andalus was after the destruction of the Second Temple. For the history of Spain, this is an important dilemma. For the history of the Jews in Mozab, all of this mattered less since their migration to the Sahara occurred after the destruction of the Second Temple. The Sephardic physical aspect could be derived not from their migration of Sephardic Jews from Sephard, but from the same stock that populated the Sephard. The Mozab Jews prospered beyond their dreams in western North Africa, but were again forced to move when Muslim fanatics destroyed Tamantik. These Jews appeared to have joined the Abadi Karad sect in Tirat before the exodus to Sahara. But these two ethnic groups arrived in Gardea. They began building a city that contained a millah, which is a Jewish quarter, a town within a town, which you will see in Figure 6. According to Briggs' in 1964 studies, its members had no dealings with the communities surrounding them except commercially. This helped with their endogamy that resulted in high inbreeding. Over the centuries, they also became isolated and unique, sometimes super Jewish and sometimes singularly un-Jewish. The Mila had a very narrow street had very narrow streets, and only two were barely wide enough to allow a cart or a car to pass. It also had tunnels, some short, but one that was particularly dark, long, and narrow. The walls of the tunnel were consolidated from the debris from much older houses. Before the French took over, it was the ancient entrance to the Mila that the Mozabites used to lock up at night from the outside. Small plazas dotted the place, some with wells. The new synagogue of Jerusalem streets was not in the square but was on top, the narrowest of streets. Briggs, 1964, describes the old synagogue as spacious, airy, and well lit by a high pyramidal cupola that was still intact when I saw it. The building was constructed at the end of the 19th century because of the old synagogue was accidentally destroyed by fire. In 1888, the French finally controlled all of Algeria as far down as Mazar. The beginning of the end the beginning of the end for the French of Algeria started suddenly in the 8th century of May. Victory in Europe Day, 1945, when a disorganized uprising of Algerian villagers massacred Europeans, mostly French, with knives and pitchforks. The Foreign Legion was called in to bomb and strike the insurgents, and it was it was over in days. But the Muslim rebellion was only starting. Let's look at some of these. Besides the Mozabites and the Jews, there were Arab nomads, the Malachites, hired to protect them from marauding Samba nomads. These Arabs were masons, shepherds, tailors, and leather workers. Some Jews were imported from the Tunisia island to the Jarb and to the Mazab because of their abilities as craftsmen. In addition, some sub-Saharan Negroes were incorporated as gardeners. Okay. Beside the Mozabites and the Jews, there were Arab nomads, the Amalekites, hired to protect them from marauding Shamba nomads. These Arabs were masons, shepherds, tailors, and leather workers. Some Jews were imported from the Tunisian islands of Jarba into the Mozab because of their abilities as craftsmen. In addition, some Sahara Negroid Africans, the Haratans, were incorporated as gardeners, a function that Mozabites and Mozab Jews considered indispensable. All of these communities lived peacefully with each other, but undeniably with a certain amount of tension. The Jews were allowed to build a synagogue, worship freely, and follow all religious ceremonies without restraint. Their isolation and strict inbreeding was welcome, since they did not want to mix with the other ethnic groups. One restriction before the French occupation was that they were forced to wear black robes and black turbans. Briggs' 1964 study remarked that the Jews of the Mozab did not look Jewish when compared with European Jews, and recognized that this must be because they were Sephardic, like as discussed above in Figure 7. After the French occupation of the Mozab, they dressed like everybody else except for red headdress of soft felt, or sometimes white skull caps instead of turbans, maybe because of inbreeding. The rate of deaf mutes was high, 2.5%, but they overcome the problem with learning sign language. Both the affected and the non-affected. Briggs' study 1964 also demonstrated that the Mozab Jews were highly dialect, 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 boy, I've had a hard time saying this word. Dialexicephalic. That's it. I'm going to call it that. Dialexicephalic. Okay. Briggs' 1964 study also demonstrated that the Mozab Jews were highly dolichocephalic, index close to 72 for men and 73 for women. The the dialochocephalic is like that long-headed sign insinuating that they were of African origin, while European Jews average indexes of over 80. In other words, the Mozab Jews had cranium that were long in relation to their breadth, which one is closer to the original Jews. So we're asking the question here, which one of these cranias are closer to the original Jews? The answer is hard to tell, but the European Jews obviously had a higher admixture coefficient with other distinct ethnic groups, like the Slavs, for example, than the Mozab Jews. In addition, genetic drift or founder effects could explain this apparent discrepancy. So what we're talking about, he's asking like which one of the cranials here in the Briggs 1964 study here. We're asking like which cranial is more of the original, and we come to find that the Ashkenazi cranial has signs of European admixture. which means that the Ashkenazi is the less original, according to Briggs' research in 1964. So let's read that again because this is an important one. I like that one. So the Briggs, and I'm going to read that with some power. The Briggs 1964 research also demonstrated that the Mozabite Jews were highly dialochocephalic, index close to 72 for men and 73 for women, while European Jews average indexes over 80. In other words, the Mozabite Jews had cranial that were long in relation to their breath. Which one is closer to the original Jew? It is hard to tell, but the European Jews obviously had a higher admixture coefficient with their distinct ethnic groups, the Slavs, for example, than the Mozabite Jews. In addition, genetic drifts or founder's effect could explain the apparent discrepancy. Another interesting aspect of the life of the Mozabite Jews was their religious rite. The Kitab, initiation ceremony of 5-year-old boys, was elaborate. Briggs' 1964 research witnessed a Kitab in the early 60s. The word Kitab is of Arabic origin and it means one who writes with speed and ease, which in the Jewish tradition reiterated for all to hear. The sense of being that the people of the book, Briggs 1964. The Katib went on for 30 days with many occasions for eating and imbibing beer and anisette. The eating involved male kid meat and testicles that were eating ceremonially. At the end, the candidate got a haircut and bathed thoroughly in preparation of being dressed with the elaborate series of gold or silver embroidered colored garbs with many Kabbalistic designs. The process culminated with a final joyous ceremony in the synagogue where 5-year-old children celebrated boisterously and in mass. The celebration of the Jews in the Sahara particularly helped to keep their traditions intact for many decades, even as they were approaching their impending diaspora, which was yet coming. After passing the Kitab, the Mozabite Jewish children submerged themselves in a deep religious experience. Here, the Sephardim part company with the Ashkenazi. Some say that this is because the Sephardim life design was a belong and peaceful relationship with the Christian and the Muslim that only broke down with the ascension of the Catholic king to the reign in Safar. After the defeat of the Muslims and with the establishment in the Inquisition and the expulsion of the infidels, Arabs and Jews in 1492, because of let me speak a little bit. Because of catastrophe, the Sephardi Jews benefited. In addition to the study of the Torah and the Talmud, their scientific thought, Greek philosophy, and Arab literature. The Ashkenazim in Western, Central, and Eastern Europe suffered rapidly from a hostile environment that pressed many into a fundamentalist approach of the persecuted. as it did in Calvinist Puritans and the Abidites, or into a rapid semi-assimilation, as the German Jews experienced, that unfortunately ended badly. As Briggs' 1964 study established, the young Mozabite Jew learned Hebrew in order to read scripture, Arab for everyday matters and Latin, French for business discussions that always took hard to get along with, a straight, what's that? A strata, a strategy that worked well for hundreds of years. In addition, in this isolate site in the world, the Mozabite Jews had, in addition, a system of magical religious concepts. One particularly interesting belief was the food taboos, unconnected with cultural limitations as dictated in Leviticus. For example, liver could not be eaten by women with a history of miscarriages. Blind men could not eat eyes from a lamb head, a delicacy of North Africa. The lame could not eat off the legs of animals, etc. Sometimes family-specific taboos would be added to the list. Finally, they lived in Janoon, which is evil spirits, and did as Arabs even when nobody had ever seen them. One important response to the evil eye is the color of blue, and this being the reason why most of the doors of the Arab and Berber villages in North Africa are painted blue. How far back? How far back is the belief? Did you think original Jews have it? The end. This balanced a striking lifestyle. This balanced a striking lifestyle about to change dramatically. The first sign that ethnic equilibrium was breaking down came in 1943 with the defeat of Nazis in North Africa. Some began to think of immigrating to Palestine. According to the French records, about 500. Here, all right. I got sideswiped there. Okay, the end. The balance and stable lifestyle was about to change dramatically. The first sign that ethnic equilibrium was breaking came down in 1943 with the defeat of the Nazis in North Africa. Some began to think of immigrating to Palestine. According to the French records, about 500 to 600 actually immigrated between 1943 and 1955, particularly after the founding of the State of Israel in 1948. The situation began to change further with the Algerian War of Independence in 1954. The revolutionaries found refuge in Mozambique because the French, by drawing their jurisdictional line considerably north of Gardia, made it convenient and safe rest recreational destination for the leaders and combatants. They still were not allowed inside the walls after sunset since their Mozabite since for the Mozabites they were infidels. Nonetheless, the Amalekites were happy with their arrangement that increased their powers, but the other ethnic groups began to fear the presence of these interlopers. Slowly, the revolutionaries began terrorizing the Mela, which, with its 1,250 Jewish inhabitants, the lobbing of grenades into the principal Jewish ballroom was threatened. Oh boy. Hold that thought for a second. I had an interruption there, but I'll go back to the beginning and we'll finish this page on out. It says jurisdictional lines considered north of Gardea made it convenient and safe rest recreational destination for their leaders and combatants. They still were not allowed inside the walls after sunset since the Mozabites, they were infidels. Nonetheless, the Amalekites were happy with the arrangement that increased their power, but that their ethnic groups began to fear the presence of these interlopers. Slowly, the revolutionaries began terrorizing the Mela with its 1,250 Jewish inhabitants. The lobbing of grenades into the principal Jewish ballroom was particularly threatening. By 1961, most of the wealthy Jews had decided to leave because they predicted the defeat of the French. It did not help that the rebels' command order non-Jews could not buy properly from the Jews. When the prominent MacHof family left suddenly in 1962, it took the heart out of the community. Then, to make matters worse, the replacement as chief of the community died 3 months after his appointment. On March 19th, 1962, representatives of the French government and the rebel government in exile signed the Evian Agreement in France, in hopes were dashed that France would be in the position to protect them. The living Jews living north of the French jurisdiction line were offered French passports. Of course, almost all availed themselves to this opportunity and left Algiers for Paris. No such luck for the Mozabite Jews. So you have the Mozab and you have the Mozab Jews. And the Mozab Jews looked at the Mozab as infidels. Many would read this and take that earlier statement where the Mozabs were not look, where the Jews saw the Mozabs as infidels. The Mozab Jews saw the non-Jews of the Mozab as infidels. Two of the 300 young Muslims started a triumphal parade, but the distinct commissioner Charles Kleinenecht in Arabic called them to disperse. A burst of submachine gun fire from an Arab soldier at the camel course ended the conversation, and the French retreated. Efforts to chart planes to leave Gardea failed at first. Then a plane landing with Muslim pilgrims was chartered to take several Jewish families to safety. Briggs was a witness to all of this and described the scene. In a moment, the refugees had swarmed on the far side of the plain. We could just see them underneath its belly, a shifting kaleidoscopic knot of brilliant colors. And then they disappeared, swallowed up in a great silvery body. Motors roared, another blast of sand and stones struck us as the plane swung around. It thundered down the runway, rose trembling in, in the dancing waves of heat, and in an instant became a dwindling black silhouette again. It turned in a great circle above where the city of Gardea lay out in sight. In the valley, miles ahead, swung off northward in a beeline and was gone. I imagined the Jews on board catching a glimpse for the last time of the city they loved and inhabited for over 700 years, and that they will never see it again. Mr. Jean Marriott, an assistant district commissioner. The remaining French authority and a righteous man badgered the French government to send more charter planes to rescue the remaining Jews. To their credit, they complied. While the event meant a catastrophe for the Mozabite Jews that had made their homes in the Sahara, it was, on the other hand, an example of historical experience that is worth remembering. Jews, Berbers, and Arabs who created this oasis and its dwellings, able to live peacefully side by side for at least 800 years. Could it happen again? Only time will tell. The rich Mozab Jews stayed in Paris, and the poor ones went on to Haaretz, Israel. Today, both places have active and organized Mozab Jewish communities. Since the Mozab Jews have not disappeared, but the chapter of Jews of the Sahara living in the Mela of Mozab was closed, and it was, in the words of Lloyd Cabot Briggs, no more forever, 1964. Note, all pictures and their sources provided by Ronald Nagel. Here, I'm slowly roll through this source material and references. All righty.